And a few seconds later, the elevator door magically opened, and a young man with plastic shopping bags stepped out, a bit sheepishly, and thanked him. "That's what we're here for," Kevin said, packing up his tools as we reversed our trip down the stairs. I also remember what he wasn't. On a midnight tour on New Year's Eve, just before guns began firing from rooftops to signal the start of the new year, a call came over the radio for a man with a shotgun, seated at the top of the stairs of a tenement building. 2 patrol cars sped down the block, no lights and sirens, as not to alert the potential shooter. 5 car doors opened and closed quickly, and everyone raced up the stairs, with me holding up the rear. I remember the sounds of shoes and boots echoing on the old dirty stairs. At least one cop had his gun drawn. I concentrated on not tripping up the stairs and forgot to be afraid. No one had any idea of what to expect, let alone who or what was there in a small enclosed space at the top. When we reached the summit, the stairwell was empty. A bogus call. We all reversed direction back down the stairs, this time with me in front opening the door, and we were met by a lieutenant standing in the street, his arms folded in front of the 2 patrol cars. His face was twisted, red with anger. "What were you thinking?" he shouted. "Did anyone think you ran up the stairs and that guy could have been standing there with a shotgun? One shot would have taken you all out." He was full of fury and fear. Anything that happened on his watch was his responsibility. The 4 cops looked at the ground. I looked at them. People walked by and looked at all of us. "You should all know better. And you too," he yelled at me. He shook his head, slammed his car door shut, and drove off. The other sector car pulled away. The cops I rode with mumbled something about the lieutenant and moved to get into the car. The keys are locked in," the driver said, embarrassed. In less than 10 minutes, the fireworks and gunshots were expected. We looked around nervously, and one cop called on the radio for a car with a Slim Jim to open the door. When we sat back in the patrol car, the cops complained about the lieutenant. Embarrassed in front of each other and in front of the people in the neighborhood and me, they cursed him until shots were fired and there were far more important things for them to worry about. Kevin would never have spoken to anyone in the way that lieutenant did. He would have been first on the scene, organized the group, and taken the lead. I asked him about the scenario a few days later. "Yeah, I heard about it," I remember him saying. "That wasn't smart. The lieutenant was right. He was scared too. The next time, take a step back and look at the situation. You don't have to rush in right away. In those few minutes, you don't lose time. You gain perspective. Think about it." That's a lesson I carry with me, still. I recently learned he spent time at Ground Zero, and imagine him digging with his bare hands to reach the missing men and women. The night before September 11th, I gave a reading from the book at the Borders in the World Trade Center, tapping the building with my fingers like touching an old friend. I lost track of Kevin and most others after September 11th. The world changed, we all changed. People were promoted, transferred, retired, moved away. Over the years, I wondered what happened to Kevin O'Rourke. I thought of looking him up and then got busy, thought of him again, forgot and thought again. You know, life gets in the way. I hesitated, not sure where he was and how to reach him or Stacy. I heard that he taught scuba diving at Floyd Bennett Field. I asked a friend in the police department to look him up for me, but he never did. I figured at some point we'd bump into each other. And so it goes. Somehow, you had the feeling that he would be here until the end. He wrote to me in June, finding me on Facebook. "Hey there, saw a few fights last week at an army garrison in Italy and thought about you. Developed an interesting skill set and am now working with the army. Heading to Afghanistan shortly, be there 12 months. Taking the fun out of jihad one bad guy at a time. How you doing?" I was so thrilled to hear from him that I wrote a couple of chatty emails, forgetting that a man in the middle of a war has no time to answer questions to catch up on the last 10 years or so. I figured when he had a break I might hear back, and perhaps at some point I'd meet an old friend again to catch up on old times. I looked at the photos on his Facebook page and kept returning to one of Kevin and his 2 children, Kevin and Caitlin. Something in their faces struck me as all 3 faced the camera and the photographer. Sense of contentment and happiness. You can see it. It was love between a father and his son and daughter, and children and their father. I'm afraid that when my words stop, this means that the story will end, and I don't want it to. I sat in a local coffee shop flipping through the news alerts, and there it was. The ones who take risks are the ones lost. I kept hoping that it was a mistake, that it was a wrong Kevin O'Rourke. I go back to that photograph again and the sadness of 2 children who will grow up not knowing him as we did, what he will miss out on and what they have lost. His remains were being returned to his family in Florida, I read. I hate the word remains. We are what remains. I found out more about Kevin's life from a Facebook page that a dear friend of his set up, with photographs and memories and snapshots and scrapbooks of others' lives with Kevin. Steve Mona posted a message on the page that shows Kevin's humanity and concern for others. This story was related by retired Lieutenant Bill Keegan. Kevin was one of the founding members of Heart 9/11. He responded to the 9th Ward of New Orleans on our first deployment in December of 2007 following Hurricane Katrina. It was Kevin who decided that the 12 homes we completed in 1 week wouldn't be ready for the families until each had a Christmas tree in the family room. That's Kevin, a tough guy with a big heart. Kevin led teams into Port-au-Prince, Haiti, following the 2010 earthquake. His knowledge and expertise were critical as we navigated a very dangerous terrain with a devastated, frightened population. The safety of the teams that Kevin led was never in doubt. Kevin, I learned, retired from the NYPD in 2003. He and Stacy moved to Hernando, Florida, was involved in the home renovation and landscaping business, loved riding his Harley, and scuba diving. I read that he decided to use his police training to work in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was just a patriot and wanted to be there with the guys to help out where he could, a good friend of his said in a local newspaper article. We tried to talk him out of it, but he just wasn't going to change his mind. At the end of his emails, Kevin always added, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Thinking about him, he loved to fix things, and perhaps he thought he could somehow fix things by being in Afghanistan. He cared about all of us and wanted to make it right. Time passes whether you do anything or not. And Kevin did much more in 52 years than so many other people have. I walked to Good Shepherd Church in my Inwood neighborhood of Upper Manhattan, and where a cross made of beams from the World Trade Center sits in the grass on Isham Street. Pressing switches to light the memorial candles, I didn't stop until every single one was lit. The ones with the working bulb shimmered in the half-light. I poked $1 for each into the slot and left a tip, and thought of Kevin, who let me into part of his life for a short time. And then it was over. Walking down to the dock at Dyckman Street next to La Marina, and where the Hudson River meets the fishermen who catch bluefish and crabs and look for the legendary sturgeon called Big Joe in the cold waters of winter, I chatted about the day's catch and told one about Kevin. I tore a piece of paper from my notebook with a message I had written the night before. One fisherman rooted around and found just the right rock. Another offered fishing line. Another used a fishing line to secure the paper with all sorts of fancy knots. Weighing my options, I asked a fisherman to throw it into the water. With my poor aim and girlish throw, it would likely only drop a couple of feet or hit someone. He took a step back and with a rock firmly in his hand, reeled back like a professional outfielder and threw my note into the middle of the Hudson. "May he rest in peace," he said. The rock landed with a splash, and my words sank beneath the murky waters. ripples moving out further and further out and disappearing into the past. I thought of Kevin again, pulling up in his patrol car and waving, asking again how everything was going. Then the car pulled away, and he was gone.